A stop would be sort of anything that you had to, get your career back on track. So it could be moving from one office to another. So you had clients, say, in London, and you moved to the U.S. office. That's a career stop because you now have to develop U.S. client base. More moving to accommodate the job of a spouse. We had more women who had done that to accommodate a husband's job when, in fact, they're probably equal in terms of wage earning potential and amount of money they earn, but they were more likely to change jobs, whereas we did not find any men who had that. Taking an internal position, but not, sort of head of recruiting, but things like, being the CHRO or being the, being the president of the organization. But that's a career stop, right? Because you're out of the market and then you have to come back into the market.
So it's kind of billable hours, is that sort of that?
Billable hours is in the market, yes. So right. Sort of doing client work. So anything, the career stops were generally around suddenly you're billing less, but it was any sort of thing that required you to just refocus, because changing from an office is still, you're still in the market. It's just you've changed your entire office, and your market has changed.
There's a huge debate, obviously, in feminism about whether the goal is to treat men and women identically, and that will kind of solve the problem, or whether women are profoundly different in terms of their needs and aspirations and career paths. And I guess all of this data, and actually quite a lot of my previous writing, helps unpack what that looks like. Because you see, what I have been describing in this data is that, 40% of women have no problem performing in that male competitive model. But 60% do have a whole different preferred path. Obviously, I'm not saying that women are less good. I actually think women are outperforming men, particularly in the educational pipeline. There's an achievement gap between men and women, which is growing, with women looking a whole lot better than men in many of the instances that we have data on right around the world, not just in the US. But I think there's profound differences. I think also a dream of the 70s was somehow, if you made enough lists on Sunday night, we could somehow persuade our partners to take up an equal load on the house front. We all tried that. And, a few of us, I think I was partially successful, but in my house, maybe the split is 65, 45. It's certainly not 50-50. And this actually shows up in my career because I have 4 children and a very needy elderly mother right now. So I've had all kinds of off-ramps. I think more than 8 stops probably. But we are also very resilient. We get back on, but in non-optimal ways, and we pay a price. So I think there are profound differences. And one of the reasons why I push very hard on investigating the nature of dreams and aspirations and ambitions for women is that that is a very profound take on how women's perspectives on what they want out of work and life are actually much more, I think, multidimensional and much richer and much more, substantial than the rather simple story that you tell when you collect this data on men, where, money and status, are the 2 main motivators. So, I'm not talking about lesser. I'm often talking about something that is richer, but it's, for the majority of women, different.
Yeah, I would just, one quick question. I think what I have told my daughter, who's 19, college sophomore, I believe women are equal in competency. But I think we need to be realists and recognize we are not working in equal environments. And that's the difference. And when I work with managers, I get that question a very different way. Meaning, well, is a woman just as good if I have to give her time off to have a baby? You know what I'm saying? So what I really try and do is get people to understand that it's not about issues of equality as related to man versus woman, better or different. But if you are a woman, in most cases, you will walk into an environment where it is not equal. You will not have as many women managers. You will not have as many opportunities for female mentors. The CEO is probably going to be a man. Life is not yet equal. We're striving to get there, but we aren't there yet. And I think we do a disservice if we don't acknowledge that.
And I would add that I found that sometimes even the notion of equal is in itself sort of a weapon to perpetuate inequality, right? I mean, because it tries to ignore everything that's different about whoever's a different person. And so one of the things that we really try to focus on is equitable treatment. So treating people alike is sometimes a disservice to one or the other, and it's not always a gender difference, but treating people equitably so that at the end of the day there's an equity notion of it that gets beyond sort of we treat everybody the same, so we end up treating, so the mean is around bad treatment, and what we want to do is treat everybody equitably.
Because by the time you slice and dice your population, your employee workforce, you're going to have age differences, you're going to have cultural differences, you're going to have, once you hit the global workforce. And the problem has been is that most of our policies, our reward mechanisms, our way of recognition are more geared towards the white male population. So being able to embed and insert and almost having an a la carte menu of value of something you offer your employees that you can assemble what's important, and the manager to be able to read what is it that's important to you versus what's important to you, both women. That's the trick of the future, how we're going to retain our workforce. And so that's what smart companies are going to have to do, as opposed to the employer directing things to the employees.
We find that the sustainability of an extreme job is very dependent on whether you have that buffer zone of an at-home wife. And for instance, the 48-year-old men in our survey are much more likely to have that at-home wife than their female peer, but also much more likely to have that at-home wife than the 30-year-old younger guy, in our data. So that it's a little bit of a generational thing as well as a gender thing. And the other thing that pops up in the data is that 10% of the women in our who are able to tolerate extreme jobs have at-home husbands, which absolutely underscores your point. And the extreme worker married to an extreme worker, there's an extraordinary kind of gutting of the quality of life that then happens. There's a lot of instability in the marriage. There's a lot of lack of sustainability in one or other of the career paths, and more often it is, the woman's career that gives. But you're absolutely right. We used to think of, two career families. We now have two persons' career, two persons' careers. That there is a whole spillover effect. But I think maybe there was some reaction on the panel.
No, I would say the data that I've looked at, in Intel, we actually have a fair amount of dual career Intel couples. We do a lot of hiring right out of college. You come to Intel, you have an extreme job. If you're going to find a husband or a wife, you're going to find them at Intel. It's the truth. And so what we have found is it depends on the level of extreme. The other thing you have to remember is if you really have two extreme couples, they're making a lot of money. And what will happen is they will use financial resources to cover up and to provide support. And generally speaking, many of those are sustainable longer than you may think. And what tends to happen is about the time kids get into middle school, early high school, is when we're seeing one of them make that decision. Now, what I don't know if that is as much about just being ready to get off, or if you got to think about age too, and just being tired. So my own personal story is my husband and I both had two extreme jobs. We did it for 3 years. And we made the decision a few years ago that he would stay home. And he was burnt out, he was ready He's now back being a math teacher. He was a math major, but we made that decision. But we did it for 3 years, and it was probably 2 years and 11 months too long.
For who, Roz?
The good news is he does laundry now.
We have a project on small businesses, women-owned small businesses at the Center for Work-Life Policy, and it's a very kind of ambiguous story. 19% of women who off-ramp, because they have such a hard time getting back into the mainstream, do start their own businesses. 1/3 of those businesses fold in the first year. They do not begin to replace their earning power, by and large, with these small businesses. I mean, since you all live on the edge of Silicon Valley, maybe you have a different idea as to what small business can do, but generally, you know, this is not a route to fame and fortune. We also find in our data that they work amazingly long hours, and it's often not a preferred route. A lot of them do it because it is a way of, you know, kind of, you know, getting back in the paid workforce. But I think that it's quite a complicated tale. It's not just an empowerment thing. And on the single parent front, in terms of the well-qualified, credentialed folks that we are pulling into, you know, our research here, just 2% actually decide to have children on their own in terms of the white population. Women of color do it rather more significantly, but it's small numbers. The burden on the single woman is much more often eldercare, much more often a godchild or a nephew or a niece or extended family. It does tend not to be, you know, a biological child that you're caring for as a single parent. That is true of a different strata of race in our society, but not in these professional ranks. Eldercare is huge. And Citigroup just did some internal work with its huge workforce, and they've decided that a professional woman will spend more years dealing with rather onerous eldercare responsibilities than that person will spend on childcare issues going into the future. So I think it's the great story going forward. And of course, it is an issue that we all face. Everyone has or will have, you know, needy parents. It's a very inclusive issue, and we've got to get much more serious about it than we are at the moment.
We do have single people, men and women, who deal with what we call family disruptions. And in general, because consulting tends to be an extreme career, it is sustainable for a very short period of time, and only in that period of time because they are highly compensated. So there is a period of time when you can throw money at the problem, but that tends to quickly stop being a really fulfilling solution. And it's around elder care. It's usually around a sibling, you know, a sick relative, or some big family disruption that really requires you to be present. And when presence is what is required, we find that you can't fill that with money, and it tends to be a career-stopping moment. And we really do try and figure out ways to make it work so that those moments can pass, and then you come back and we can get you back on track. But we have not, in our industry, just because of the drives of kind of a client-driven industry, been able to have that be very sustainable over a long term.
Were you asking about do women managers manage differently? We have tried, I'm sure you're aware Intel is data-driven, we research everything. And we have actually tried to find the answer out to that. And we have had anecdotal stories and evidence that tells us that we believe that women tend to be more inclusive and do a better job of developing women. The challenge is that because it's a law of small numbers, so when we look at women that are on the fast track, women getting promoted, yes, some of them are being managed by women, but actually more of them are being managed by men because we have more men managers. So when we do focus groups, you'll hear women say things like, I loved when I was pregnant I had a female manager because I could actually talk to her about things that I would never have brought up with my male manager. So anecdotally, there is more of a feeling of comfort. But the other thing that I would tell you is many women in corporate America that have made it to the top have molded themselves to a male model. So don't assume when they get there they are the same as when they started. Does that make sense? And it's not a ding. We are all survivors. It's just don't, you can't assume that, okay, if you put 10 more women in the executive office, then, your environment will be more friendly and group hug. It may not happen that way. But certainly, I will tell you what our data does say, is that people of color progress and develop people of color faster.
That's very interesting.
That data is there, and I think that data exists in a variety of areas. That's not necessarily Intel data. That's data that absolutely exists.
And just because I didn't really answer, but one of the things that we did, there's a small number of senior women who are moms at Booz Allen. And we were at some meeting about 2 years ago, to Rod's older point, and we just made a decision that we were just going to come out about being moms. We had been in the closet. We were just gonna come out. And so now, in the rare times I say, like, I am not going to be. I have to take, tomorrow. I signed up for cooking class at the first grade. And I will tell anybody who asks, that's where I am. Yep, don't call me. I'm in cooking class till 10 o'clock. Then I'll, and at 10 o'clock on the dot, I walk out, and I'm BlackBerried and the cell phone's back on and I'm completely connected. But to your point, we made this active decision that we were not going to lie or pretend that, something was not going on, because we wanted junior women that have children and men that have children to understand that you have got to have some way of achieving a balance. And the only way you can do that is because you have to see senior people who make that time and make family a priority in some way and say, this is what I'm doing, and therefore it's okay for you to do it too. And so that's very anecdotal because we haven't tracked if it's data, but I have to believe it makes a difference.
For us, I'm just going to add one very quick comment. For us, the issue of flexibility has become huge for women with elderly parents. In fact, we have, today, I talked to maybe 3 or 4 women who are working remotely, taking care of elderly parents. So it just stops being the mother thing. It becomes bigger and broader as our population ages, and we have to retain them.
One brief footnote to the question about do women do it differently, because last year the Center on Ethics, in collaboration with the Harvard Center on Public Leadership, sponsored a summit on women in leadership, which is where Sylvia and I found ourselves together, and there's a book coming out in which she has an essay, and I do as well, that reviews all that data about gender differences in management styles and much else. And basically it confirms what Rosalind said, that differences are quite exaggerated in popular culture and in anecdotal reports. If you look at, and they conform to stereotypes, and people tend to evaluate themselves in light of those stereotypes. But when you look at how women perform in the real world and how they're evaluated by peers and subordinates and superiors, you don't find strong gender differences for the reasons you suggest, that in order to advance to a certain leadership level, women generally conform to the culture.